She held the yellowed photograph with trembling hands. Inside the golden hall, the man who had just laughed at her poverty now looked at his own young image, beside a woman and a baby. Silence cut the air like a blade. He tried to deny it, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The hall sparkled like a sea of diamonds under the light of crystal chandeliers. The delicate sound of champagne glasses mingled with the subdued laughter of the guests, creating a symphony of elegance and power. Gathered there was the cream of society, entrepreneurs, politicians, socialites, all dressed in the best money could buy. At the center of that golden universe, Henry Miller observed everything with the cold serenity of someone who believes the world bends to his presence. At 52, he had built an empire from nothing. His factories employed thousands, his investments moved millions, and his name was engraved on golden plaques of dozens of companies scattered across the country. Henry adjusted the gold watch on his wrist and smiled discreetly at a group of businessmen approaching. That night, he was celebrating the acquisition of yet another company, the 15th in 2 years. Power tasted sweet, and he savored every sip of that victory. Outside, the fine October drizzle painted the streets a melancholic gray. The cold wind carried the smell of wet earth and fallen leaves, announcing that winter would soon arrive. It was in this contrast between the warmth of the hall and the cold of the street that life prepared to write one of its cruelest pages. Mary Flowers walked the slippery sidewalks with her wicker basket balanced on her arm. At 28, she knew the harshness of life as few did. Her worn shoes, mended 3 times already, made a dull sound against the wet asphalt. Her simple dress, washed so many times that the original color had faded, was soaked by the rain that was starting to thicken. She stopped before the imposing building where the party was taking place. Through the enormous windows, she could see elegant silhouettes moving in a social dance she had never experienced. For a moment she hesitated. She knew she didn't belong in that world, but necessity was greater than fear. Inside the basket, simple flowers picked from her own backyard mingled with others bought at the central market. White roses, red carnations, some daisies and violets, nothing too sophisticated, but arranged with the care of someone who understands that beauty doesn't have to cost a lot. Mary took a deep breath and climbed the marble steps. Her hands were icy, not just from the cold, but from the anxiety that grew with each step. When she pushed open the glass door, the warmth of the environment enveloped her like an unexpected embrace, but it lasted only seconds. The contrast was immediate and brutal. Conversations gradually ceased, like waves breaking on the shore. All eyes turned to her, some curious, others uncomfortable, many clearly bothered by the intrusion. Mary attempted a timid smile and took a few steps into the hall. Her wet footprints marked the polished marble floor, creating a trail that seemed to betray her humble origins. She offered a small bouquet to a silver-haired lady who merely shook her head and walked away. Henry observed the scene from afar, his brow furrowed. That woman was disturbing the harmony of his event. This was not her place, and he would make sure to make that clear. Mary approached other guests, always with the same hopeful smile, always receiving the same silent response of rejection. She felt the weight of their stares, the murmur that began to spread, but she continued. She needed to sell at least a few flowers to buy medicine for her Vincent, the old man she had cared for since her adoptive mother died. It was then that she noticed the man in the center of the hall. Tall, imposing, with grey hair combed back and a suit that cost more than she earned in a year. There was something in his face that seemed familiar to her, but she couldn't identify what. Henry saw her begin to walk towards him. Discomfort turned into irritation. He made a sharp gesture to one of the security guards, but the woman was faster. She stopped before him, with the basket in her hands and her eyes full of a strange mixture of shame and hope. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice low and respectful. "Would you like to buy some flowers?" "They're fresh. I picked them today." The entire hall seemed to have stopped to watch the scene. Henry looked her up and down, making no attempt to disguise his contempt. He chuckled softly, a cold laugh that cut through the silence like a razor. "How much?" he asked, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Does pity disguised as a flower cost?" The question echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Mary felt her face burn with shame. She tried to respond, to explain that it wasn't pity, that she really sold flowers, but the words were lost amidst the murmurs that began to grow. "Didn't you understand the question?" Henry insisted, enjoying the power he felt over the situation. "Or perhaps you don't know the price of your own humiliation." Tears began to form in Mary's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She raised her chin with a dignity that contrasted with her simple appearance and said, her voice firm, despite the tremor, "My flowers cost $2 each, sir, but dignity is priceless." The answer surprised Henry for a moment, but he was already too intoxicated with power to back down. He laughed again and gestured to the security guard. "Remove this vendor from my event," he ordered with disdain. "I think she's lost." The security guard, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, approached Mary gently. She didn't resist. She only looked at Henry one last time with a gaze he couldn't decipher. There was something more than sadness there, something that seemed like recognition. The door closed behind her with a dry sound, leaving in the air a trace of flower perfume and the bitter taste of humiliation. The hall gradually returned to normal, but some guests still whispered about what had happened. Henry returned to his conversations, convinced that he had adequately handled the interruption. He had no idea that that night would change his life forever. He didn't know that outside, in the cold of the early morning. Mary Flowers held in her apron pocket a yellowed photograph she had kept for more than 20 years. A photograph showing a young man with the same haughty face as the one who had just laughed at her. Outside the building, Mary stood for long minutes under the drizzle that was now falling more intensely. The cold penetrated through the thin fabric of her dress, but she barely felt it. Her mind was elsewhere, in another time, trying to process what had just happened. The golden lights of the hall still shone through the windows, and she could see the silhouettes of the guests resuming their lively conversations. For them, those few minutes were already history. For her, they were the awakening of a pain that had slept for decades. Mary slowly descended the marble steps, each footstep echoing in the silent night. Her hands trembled, not only from the cold, but from the emotion that grew in her chest like a storm. In her apron pocket, her fingers found the familiar outline of the photograph she always carried. She had found it among the few belongings left by Mrs. Connie when she died 3 years ago. The old woman who had raised her had never talked much about Mary's past, only said that she had arrived as a baby, brought by a desperate woman who couldn't care for her. "Your mother was a good girl," Mrs. Connie used to say, "but life sometimes forces choices that break the heart." Now, standing in the rain, Mary understood that perhaps fate had conspired for her to be there that night. It wasn't a coincidence. Something greater was orchestrating that encounter. For a moment, she thought of leaving, going home, taking care of Vincent, forgetting what had happened. But something inside her refused to accept that end. A force she couldn't explain made her turn around and walk to the side entrance of the building. The doorman, an elderly man in a navy blue uniform, was dozing in his chair. Mary passed him silently and went up the service stairs to the event floor. There, she found a side corridor that led to the hall, but she remained hidden in the shadows. She waited and waited. Time seemed to have stopped, but she knew that sooner or later, everyone would leave. She needed to speak to that man alone, away from curious glances and cruel laughter. The hours dragged on like years. Mary heard the conversations gradually diminishing, footsteps echoing in the corridors, cordial goodbyes. Her clothes were almost dry now, but the cold had settled into her bones. Finally, around 2 in the morning, the hall began to empty. The last guests left, The waiters collected the empty glasses, and silence again dominated the atmosphere. Henry remained in the hall, alone, adjusting his jacket in front of a golden mirror. He seemed satisfied with the night, with the deals closed, with the impression he had made. He didn't notice when Mary approached from behind, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. "Sir," she said, her voice low but firm. Henry turned, surprised and irritated that someone was still there. When he recognized her, his expression hardened. "You're still here? I thought the security guard—" "I needed to speak with you," Mary interrupted, taking the photograph from her pocket with trembling hands. "Alone. We have nothing to talk about," Henry said, making a move to walk away. "If it's money you want, do you remember this face?" Mary asked, extending the photograph before him. Henry looked impatient, ready to dismiss another attempt at extortion or blackmail. But when his eyes focused on the image, something broke in his expression. The air seemed to leave his lungs. It was himself, 20-something years younger, smiling at the camera. Beside him, a fair-haired woman with sweet eyes held a baby wrapped in a floral cloth. The photograph was old, yellowed by time, but the image was clear enough to leave no doubt. Where did you get this?" Henry murmured, his voice hoarse. "It was the only thing left by my mother," Mary said, carefully observing his every reaction. "This photo and the faith that one day I would find out who my father was." The silence that settled between them was heavy, dense, almost physical. Henry reached out a trembling hand to take the photograph, but Mary withdrew it. "It can't be," he whispered, shaking his head. "That was a long time ago. I was young, irresponsible." "Clarice," Mary said, and the name dropped between them like a stone in a silent lake. "That was my mother's name, wasn't it?" Henry's eyes widened. He leaned against the wall, as if his legs might give way at any moment. Clarice, how long had it been since he heard that name? How long had he not allowed that memory to surface? "She worked at your first factory," Mary continued, her voice growing firmer. "You promised to marry her when you found out she was pregnant. But when your parents found out, when the family pressured you—" "Stop," Henry said, his voice almost inaudible. "Please stop." But Mary didn't stop. 28 years of unanswered questions poured from her mouth like a dam finally breaking. She was fired, expelled from the city. She had to give me to a stranger to raise because she couldn't support me alone. She died 3 years later, never truly knowing me, never hearing my first word or seeing my first steps. Henry slid down the wall until he was sitting on the marble floor, his head in his hands. The photograph in his memories overlapped the image of the woman standing before him. Clarice's same green eyes, the same shape of her face, the same way she tilted her head when she spoke. "I was young," he repeated, as if trying to convince himself. "My parents, they said it was better that way, that I had a future ahead of me, that I couldn't throw everything away for a youthful mistake." "A youthful mistake," Mary repeated, and there was a deep pain in her voice. "Was that how you saw me? As a mistake?" Henry lifted his face and truly looked at her for the first time. He saw beyond the simple dress and worn shoes. He saw the daughter he had never known, the child who had grown up without a father, the woman who had become strong despite all adversities. "I didn't know she had died," he murmured. "I thought you were both well somewhere. I convinced myself it was better that way. For years, I wondered if it was true," Mary said, putting the photograph away again. "If my father really didn't know I existed, or if he simply didn't care. Today, I found the answer." She turned to leave, but Henry quickly stood up. "Wait," he said, his voice desperate. I can explain. I can make amends." Mary stopped, but didn't turn around. "Make amends for what, sir? The 28 years we lost? The nights Mrs. Connie rocked me while I cried, asking why I didn't have a father. The days I went hungry because she spent the little money she had on me. I can give you everything now," Henry said, approaching. "Money, education, a home, a name." Finally, Mary turned around. Her eyes were dry, but there was an infinite sadness in them. "You still don't understand," she said with a calm that startled Henry. I didn't come here to ask for anything. I only came so you would know that your daughter exists. And to say that I am not like you. What do you mean? I don't laugh at the pain of others. I don't humiliate those who have less. I don't forget where I came from. Mary paused, took a deep breath. And I don't abandon those who need me. The words struck Henry like physical blows. He tried to approach, but she took a step back. I don't need anything from you, Mary said. I just wanted you to know the truth. Now I can leave in peace. And she did leave, leaving Henry alone in the empty hall, with the echo of her words and the weight of a truth that would change his life forever. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first lights of dawn began to paint the sky a pale pink. Mary walked the deserted streets without haste, without looking back. She knew that this encounter was just the beginning of something much bigger. She didn't imagine that. At that very moment, Henry was picking up the phone to make the first call of an investigation that would confirm every word she had said. Henry couldn't sleep that night. He remained seated in his leather armchair in the living room of his mansion, watching the first lights of dawn through the enormous windows. The photograph Mary had shown him wouldn't leave his mind. Every detail was etched in his memory like a burning iron. By 7 in the morning, he was already on the phone. He called Mark, his private investigator, a discreet man who had resolved several delicate situations for him over the years. I need you to investigate someone, Henry said without preamble. A woman named Mary Flowers, about 28 years old, sells flowers on the streets. I want to know everything about her. Any specific problem, Mr. Miller? Mark asked. Henry hesitated. How could he explain that he needed to confirm if that woman was really his daughter? How could he admit that he had spent almost 3 decades pretending that part of his past didn't exist? Just do the investigation, he finally said. And I want it fast. While he waited, Henry tried to keep busy with business, but the meeting seemed endless. The numbers in the reports blurred before his eyes, and he constantly found himself lost in thought. In the afternoon, Mark called back. Mr. Miller, I found some interesting information. Mary Flowers Santos, 28 years old, born in October 1995. She was raised by a lady named Conception Mary Santos, deceased. She works selling flowers and does some cleaning jobs to support herself. She lives in a simple house in the Hopeville neighborhood. And about her biological family. That's where it gets interesting, sir. There's no father registered on her birth certificate. Her mother's name was Clarice Adams. She died in 1998 at 22 from complications of pneumonia. She worked for a few years in a textile factory. Henry's heart raced. Clarice. It had been so long since he had uttered that name, since he had convinced himself it was just a youthful dream. Which factory? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Miller Textile Co., sir. The first factory you opened, in the 90s. Henry hung up the phone with trembling hands. There was no longer any doubt. Mary Flowers was his daughter, the daughter he had chosen to ignore when he still had time to be a father. In the following days, Henry couldn't concentrate on anything else. He asked Mark to continue investigating, wanting to know every detail of the life of the daughter he had never known how to raise. The information arrived like stabs. Mary had gone hungry several times during her childhood. Mrs. Connie, the woman who raised her, worked as a laundress and ate 1 meal a day, so the girl could eat 2. Mary had stopped studying at 16 to work and help with expenses. She took care of Mrs. Connie during her last years of life, Mark reported. She paid for all the medicines, all the medical appointments, even when she was struggling. Now she takes care of an elderly gentleman in the same neighborhood. Each piece of information was a painful revelation about the character of the daughter he had failed to value. While he built an empire, Mary built a life based on love and sacrifice. The first twist came when Henry discovered something that made him pale with shock. The factory where Clarice had worked, the same one where she had been fired when her pregnancy was discovered, he had bought again 2 years ago. He had laid off hundreds of old employees to modernize production, without ever bothering to check histories or personal situations. How many lives had he destroyed without even knowing? The second twist was even crueler. Mark discovered that Clarice had sought Henry out several times before she died. She had sent letters that were intercepted by his secretary, following his parents' instructions. She had gone to the offices, but had been prevented from entering by security guards. "She tried to tell you about the child," Mark said. "There are records of at least 6 attempts to contact you." Henry leaned against the desk, feeling the world spin around him. Clarice had died trying to tell him she had a daughter, and he never knew because his family had decided to protect him from that inconvenience. The third twist came when he asked to investigate where Mary got the flowers she sold. The answer left him speechless. She picked them from a public garden that had been built on the land where Clarice's old house stood. Mary planted and cared for the same species of flowers her mother cultivated when she was alive. Without knowing it, she had created a living memorial to the woman she had never known. For an entire week, Henry couldn't work properly. He kept looking out his office window, imagining where his daughter might be at that moment, what she might be doing if she was facing difficulties. Gradually, the pride that had sustained him for decades began to crumble. He had built an empire, but had failed as a man. He had accumulated riches, but lost the only things that truly mattered. He decided to seek her out again, not to justify himself, but to try to repair at least a small part of the damage he had caused. He found out where she lived and went there one Thursday afternoon. The house was small, simple, but impeccably clean and organized. A small garden in front displayed colorful flowers, cared for with affection. Henry stood outside for several minutes, trying to find the courage to knock on the door. When he finally knocked, it was old Vincent who answered, a thin, white-haired man who looked at him with suspicion. "If you're here to talk to Mary, she's not here," the old man said. "She went to sell flowers downtown." "I can wait," Henry said. "No need." "She already told me who you are." "And she said she doesn't want to talk." The words were direct, without circumlocution. Vincent closed the door unceremoniously, leaving Henry standing there, confronted with the reality that his daughter truly wanted nothing to do with him. But he didn't give up. He began to help her in secret, buying her flowers through intermediaries, sending anonymous donations, discreetly paying Vincent's medical bills, all without her knowing it was him. For months, this was his only form of connection with his daughter. Seeing her from afar, making sure she was well, trying to compensate in some way for the lost years until fate prepared a new turn. Mary was invited to work as a housekeeper at one of his company's country estates. Henry had no idea she was there when he decided to visit the property to check some documents. It was a shock for both of them. Mary was in the garden, watering the plants, when she saw him arrive. She stood motionless, expressionless, as if seeing a ghost. Henry stopped a few feet away, not knowing what to say. Finally, his voice choked. He just asked, "A glass of water?" Mary looked at him for a long moment, then nodded and headed into the house. Henry stood there in the garden, observing the flowers she had planted. They were the same species she sold on the streets: roses, carnations, daisies. When she returned with the glass of water, Henry held her hand before she could pull away. "The only inheritance I want to leave you," he said. Tears in his eyes, "is an apology." Mary didn't answer immediately. She just looked at him for a long time, with a mixture of pain and compassion that broke Henry's heart. "Forgiveness," she finally said, "is not something you inherit. It's something you earn." And once again she walked away, leaving Henry alone with his tears and the certainty that there was still a long way to go to regain the right to be called a father. Mary's phrase echoed in Henry's mind for days. Forgiveness is not something you inherit. It's something you earn. He understood that empty declarations and attempts to buy his daughter's affection would not work. If he wanted a chance at redemption, he would have to prove it through actions. That same week, Henry made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He gathered his company's board of directors and announced that he would create a foundation to help small workers and needy families. "I want it to be focused especially on single mothers and children in vulnerable situations," he said, ignoring the surprised looks of the executives. "And I want it to have a specific professional training program." His team thought it was just a marketing ploy, a way to improve the company's image. They didn't know that Henry was trying to honor Clarice's memory and all the women who, like her, were abandoned to their own fate. He worked day and night on the foundation's structure. He personally visited nursing homes, daycare centers, and community centers to understand people's real needs. It was the first time in decades that he had left his air-conditioned office to see the world through the eyes of those who truly needed help. One of the foundation's initiatives would be an urban floriculture program. Low-income women would be trained to grow and sell flowers, creating a sustainable source of income. Henry knew that Mary wouldn't accept to participate if she knew he was behind the project. So he worked through intermediaries. 2 weeks later, Mary received an official invitation to coordinate the flower program for the Living Hope Foundation. The name had been chosen in honor of the neighborhood where she lived, although she didn't know it. "It's a unique opportunity," said the social worker who contacted her. "The program will initially train 50 women, and you would be responsible for teaching cultivation techniques and floral arrangements." Mary hesitated. It was exactly the kind of work she had always dreamed of doing, but something made her suspicious. "Who is funding this?" she asked. "A businessman from the city who wishes to remain anonymous," the social worker replied. "He said he wants to help, but without fanfare." After much thought, Mary accepted. It was a chance to teach other women the art she had learned from Mrs. Connie, a way to multiply the affection she had received. Henry followed everything from afar, through reports and discreet visits to the program's location. 3 times a week he would appear as an investor, interested in checking the progress of the work, always when he knew Mary wouldn't be there. Seeing her through the windows, teaching other women with patience and affection, deeply moved him. Mary had inherited from Clarice not only beauty, but also generosity and the ability to transform lives with small gestures. The program was an immediate success. The women not only learned to grow flowers, but found in the activity a form of therapy and social interaction. Many of them had stories similar to Mary's: single mothers, abandoned, struggling to raise their children alone. Mary dedicated herself fully to the project. She arrived early, left late, and always found time to talk individually with each participant. She understood the pain of those women because she had personally experienced the difficulties of growing up without a father. It was during one of those afternoons that fate prepared a new twist. Henry had gone to check some plants in the foundation's nursery when he heard voices coming from the garden. He hid behind a tree and saw Mary talking to one of the program participants. "My daughter asks about her father every day," the woman said, tears in her eyes. "I don't know what to tell her." "Tell her the truth," Mary replied, her voice soft. "That not all men are prepared to be fathers, that some run away from responsibility. But that doesn't mean she is less loved or less important." "You speak like someone who understands," the woman said. "I understand," Mary confirmed. "I grew up without a father too. For a long time I was angry, wondering what was wrong with me. Then I understood that the problem wasn't mine. It was his." Henry felt the words like slaps to the face. Every sentence was a truth he had tried to ignore for almost 3 decades. "What if he showed up today?" the woman asked. "Would you forgive him?" Mary remained silent for a long moment, idly stirring the soil in the pot she was preparing. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened," she finally said. "It's about choosing not to let resentment dominate our lives. If he showed up today, I would try to understand. But he would have to prove that he truly changed. How? Through actions. Words are easy. Anyone can apologize. But real change is seen in what a person does, not what they say." Henry left deeply touched. Mary had answered the question he didn't know how to ask. She was willing to forgive, but only if he proved he deserved it. From that day on, he intensified his efforts to transform himself into someone worthy of his daughter's forgiveness. He sold 2 of his mansions and donated the money to social causes. He changed labor policies in his companies, offering better wages and benefits. He began to frequent the same market where Mary sold flowers on weekends, but never approached her. He stayed far away, buying a bouquet every week, just to hear her voice say the price. Mary noticed the man who appeared regularly, always well-dressed, always buying flowers and never haggling. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't identify what. One day, she decided to set aside a flower for him. When Henry approached to buy his weekly bouquet, she extended a white rose. "This is complimentary," she said, without looking directly at him. Henry took the flower with trembling hands. It was the first thing he had received from his daughter in almost 30 years. He kept it as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. "Thank you very much," he said, his voice choked. Mary only nodded, but when he walked away, she watched him. There was something in the way he walked, the way he held his shoulders, that awakened a distant memory. In the following weeks, they developed a silent routine. He bought flowers, she always included a compliment. They exchanged a few polite words about the weather or the quality of the plants. Mary began to notice that he knew a lot about flowers. He could identify species, knew cultivation techniques, spoke fondly of gardens from his childhood. "Do you have a gardener?" she asked one day. "No," Henry replied. "I take care of the plants myself. It's therapeutic." "Who did you learn from?" Henry hesitated. How could he tell her that he had learned by watching Clarice tend to her small garden years ago when they were young and dreamed of a future together? "From someone very special," he finally said. "Someone who taught me that plants need constant care to flourish." There was something in his voice that touched Mary. A deep sadness, a regret that seemed to consume his soul. Over time, their conversations became a little longer. Henry asked about the Foundation's program. Mary told him about the participants' progress. She noticed that he always asked very specific questions, as if he knew details of the project. "You seem to know a lot about the Living Hope Foundation," she commented one day. "It's an interesting project," Henry replied, avoiding her gaze. "Anyone should be interested in initiatives that help women in difficulty." Mary studied him for a moment. There was something that didn't fit, but she couldn't pinpoint what. What she didn't know was that Henry spent his nights planning ways to be more present in her life without revealing his identity. He had become a man obsessed with the daughter he lost, determined to win her forgiveness through gestures that spoke louder than words. And gradually, without either of them fully realizing it, a strange form of affection was blossoming between them. It wasn't the love between father and daughter that would take much longer to rebuild, but it was the beginning of mutual respect, based on actions and not on promises. The moment of truth was approaching, and neither of them imagined how it would arrive. The discovery happened unexpectedly, as revelations that change the course of stories often do. It was a Thursday morning when Mary arrived at the foundation and found Henry talking to the project coordinator. She stopped at the entrance, observing him from afar. There was something different about the situation. The man who bought flowers every week was there, in an environment that should be strange to him, talking familiarly about details that only someone deeply involved with the project would know. "Mr. Henry is checking the productivity report," explained Mrs. Sandra, the coordinator, when Mary approached. "He represents the anonymous investor who funds our program." The world seemed to stop for Mary. Mr. Henry, the same name as the man who had humiliated her in the Golden Hall months ago. The same man who had bought flowers from her every week since then. The same man who was her father. Henry turned when he heard Mrs. Sandra's voice and met Mary's eyes. For a moment, neither of them could move. It was as if time had frozen, leaving only the two of them there, confronted with a truth they had both tried to avoid. "You Mary whispered, her voice almost inaudible. Mary. Okay, Henry began, but she interrupted him by raising her hand. Outside, she said with a chilling calm. I want to talk to you. Outside, now. Mrs. Sandra was confused by the sudden tension between the two, but Mary was already walking towards the exit. Henry followed her, his heart beating like a war drum. Outside the foundation, Mary turned to him with eyes ablaze. How long? She asked, her voice controlled but laden with emotion. Mary, let me explain. How long? She shouted, finally losing her composure. Since the beginning, Henry admitted, lowering his head. Since I created the foundation, I wanted to help, but I knew you wouldn't accept it if you knew it was me. Mary laughed, but there was no humor in that laugh. It was the bitter sound of someone who had just discovered they had been deceived. So it was all a farce. The program, my work, the women who are being helped, all of it was just for you to feel better about your conscience. No, Henry said, desperate. The program is real. The work you do is important. The women are truly being helped. I just wanted to make sure you were well by lying to me, by trying to take care of you in the only way I could. Mary shook her head, incredulous. You don't understand, do you? You still don't understand. What don't I understand? That I don't need to be taken care of by you. That I'm not your responsibility. That you lost the right to worry about me 28 years ago. The words cut Henry like blades. He tried to approach, but she took a step back. Mary, please. I know I made terrible mistakes. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm trying to be different. I'm trying to become the man I should have been. For what? She asked, tears in her eyes. To feel better? To sleep peacefully at night knowing you did the right thing? Or because you really care about me? The question caught Henry off guard. He had asked himself the same question many times, trying to understand his own motivations. In the beginning, he said with painful honesty, maybe it was to feel better. But now it's because I love you. Because you are my daughter, and I wasted all these years. Love, Mary repeated, incredulous. You don't love me. You don't even know me. Then give me a chance to know you, Henry pleaded. Give me a chance to be your father. Father? Mary's voice went up an octave. Vincent is my father. Mrs. Connie was my mother. They raised me, loved me, were with me when I needed them. You are just the man who made my biological mother suffer. Every word was a stab, but Henry knew he deserved it. There was much that needed to be said, much that needed to be forgiven. You're right, he said finally. I'm not your father. I don't deserve that title. But I am your blood, whether you want it or not. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for the mistakes I made. I don't want your compensation, Mary said, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I just want you to leave me alone. I can't do that. Why? Because now that I know you exist, that I see the incredible woman you've become despite me, I can't simply pretend it didn't happen. Mary looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, looking for signs of sincerity or manipulation. Will the program continue? She finally asked. Yes, Henry replied without hesitation. With or without you. Those women need help, and they will receive it. What if I leave? I hope you don't leave. You are the best thing that has happened to that place. The women trust you, learn from you. You have a gift, Mary, a gift you inherited from your mother. The mention of Clarice made Mary falter for a moment. Do you still think of her? She asked, almost whispering. Every day, Henry admitted. Especially now, seeing you. You have her same smile, her same way of tilting her head when she's thinking. Tell me about her, Mary said, surprising herself with the request. Henry took a deep breath. It was the first time he would talk about Clarice to anyone in almost 30 years. She was luminous, he began, his eyes lost in memories. She worked at the factory, but always with a smile on her face. She hummed while she worked. She had magical hands for plants. Anything she touched flourished. Why did you abandon her? The question was simple, but the answer was too complex to be explained in a few words. Because I was a coward, Henry said with brutal honesty. Because my parents convinced me that I had a brilliant future ahead of me and that a pregnant factory worker would ruin everything. Because I believed that money and status were more important than love. And now, do you still believe that? Henry shook his head. Now I know I built an empty empire. I have money, power, influence, but I have nothing that truly matters. I have no family, no true love, no peace. Mary remained silent for several minutes, processing everything that had been said. I will continue with the program, she finally said. But not for you, for the women who need help. Thank you, Henry said, with clear relief in his voice. And you will stop buying flowers from me on weekends. Mary, no. If you really want to change, if you want to prove you're different, then do it away from me. I don't want your shadow around all the time. I don't want to feel watched. Henry nodded, though every word was like a prison sentence. But Mary continued, hesitating. If one day I want to know more about my mother, about how you met, can I look for you? Always, Henry replied immediately. Anytime, any day. I'll be waiting. Mary nodded and turned to go back into the foundation. She stopped at the door and looked back. One thing, she said. Don't call me daughter. Not yet, maybe never. But especially not now. What should I call you? Mary, just Mary. And she entered the foundation, leaving Henry standing there, heartbroken, but for the first time in decades, with a spark of hope. He had lost the right to be called father, but perhaps with time and much dedication, he could earn the right to be considered family. It was a beginning. Painful, difficult, but it was a beginning. 3 months passed since the discovery at the foundation. Henry had kept his promise to stay distant, but Mary knew he was still around. Sometimes she saw his car slowly passing by the foundation street. Other times she received reports about anonymous donations that always arrived at the right time. The floriculture program had grown exponentially. From 50 women, they now served almost 200. Henry had expanded the project to 3 different neighborhoods, always keeping Mary informed through the coordination, but without contacting her directly. Mary dedicated herself to the work with an intensity that worried even Vincent. She came home exhausted, but with sparkling eyes when she talked about the participants' progress. You're working yourself to death, the old man would say as she prepared dinner. It's like you're running away from something. And he was right. Mary was running away from her own feelings. The anger had diminished over time, giving way to a confusion of emotions that she didn't know how to process. One day, one of the program participants, Mrs. Lucy, brought her 6-year-old daughter to the foundation. The girl was fascinated watching the women care for the flowers and asked if she could help. My daughter wants to know if she can plant a flower for her father, Mrs. Lucy told Mary. He died last year, and she still doesn't quite understand. Mary knelt beside the girl and asked what kind of flower she wanted to plant. One that will go all the way to heaven, the child replied. So he can see it from up there. The child's innocence deeply touched Mary. She helped the girl plant a sunflower, explaining that they grew tall and always faced the sun. That way your father will be able to see your flower from wherever he is, Mary said, hugging the child. That night Mary couldn't sleep. The girl's situation made her think about her own relationship with paternal absence. The child had good memories of her father, even if he was gone. Mary didn't even have that. The next morning she made a decision that surprised her. She called Henry's secretary and scheduled a meeting. They met in a small cafe, away from the places they both frequented. Henry arrived punctually, his face anxious, not knowing what to expect. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said. When Mary sat at the table, "I want to know about my mother," Mary said without preamble. "Everything. How you met, what she was like, what happened when you found out about me." Henry took a deep breath and began to tell his story. He spoke about how he met Clarice on her first day of work at the factory, how she was different from all the women he knew. He talked about the lunches they shared, the conversations about dreams and plans for the future. She wanted a house with a garden, Henry said, his eyes lost in memories. She talked about planting flowers of all colors, having children to play among the plants. And you? What did you want? I wanted to impress my father. I wanted to prove that I could be successful in business. I thought love was a luxury I couldn't afford. Mary listened in silence. Henry told her about the day Clarice said she was pregnant, about the initial joy that gave way to panic when his parents found out. They said she was trying to trap me, that she wanted to take advantage of the situation, Henry admitted with shame. And I believed it, or I wanted to believe it. What happened next? My father offered her money to have an abortion. When she refused, he offered her money to leave. She refused again. Then they fired her and spread rumors about her in the city. Tears streamed down Mary's face, but she didn't wipe them away. And you, what did you do? Nothing, Henry said, his voice broken. I did nothing. I let it happen because it was easier than confronting my parents. Did she try to talk to you? Many times. But I always found excuses not to answer. I thought that if I ignored the situation, it would simply disappear. And it did disappear, Mary said bitterly. Yes, and she took you with her. They remained silent for several minutes. Henry knew that every word he said caused Mary pain, but she had asked for the truth, and he was determined to give it to her. Did you regret it? Mary finally asked. Every day of my life, but especially after I saw you in that hall. Seeing you there, proud despite everything, made me realize what kind of person I really was. And now, what kind of person are you now? Henry reflected on the question. I'm still finding out. But I know I want to be someone who honors your mother's memory. Someone you can one day not be ashamed to call father. Mary watched him for a long moment. I'm going to her grave tomorrow, she finally said. It's the anniversary of her death. I go every year since I found out where she's buried. Henry nodded, not knowing what to say. You can come with me, Mary said, surprising them both. If you want. Are you sure? No, but I think it's time. The next day they met at the cemetery gate. Henry had brought flowers, a simple bouquet of white daisies, Clarice's favorites. They walked in silence to the grave. The headstone was simple, with only the name and dates. Mary had planted rose bushes around it, which bloomed exuberantly even in winter. Hi, Mom, Mary said, kneeling before the headstone. I brought someone to meet you. Henry approached slowly and placed his flowers next to those Mary had brought. I'm sorry, he whispered to the headstone. I'm sorry for everything. They stood there for almost an hour, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Mary who broke the silence. She taught me through Mrs. Connie that to love means to be present. It means choosing to stay even when it's difficult. She was right, Henry said. Do you want to learn? Mary asked, looking at him. To be present. To stay even when it's difficult. More than anything in the world. Then start now. Stop trying to compensate for the past and start building the present. Henry nodded, feeling for the first time a real spark of hope. In the months that followed, they built a careful routine. Bi-weekly lunches where they talked about the Foundation's program and little by little about their lives. Henry talked about his businesses, about the changes he was implementing to make his companies more humane. Mary talked about the women she helped, about Vincent, about her dreams. It was not yet a father-daughter relationship.
Perhaps it never would be.
But it was something new, built on honesty and mutual respect. A year after their first meeting at the cemetery, Mary made a decision. She appeared at Henry's office one Friday afternoon, carrying a small pot with flower seedlings. For your office, she said, placing the pot on his desk. Clarice always said that flowers improve any environment. Henry looked at the pot with tear-filled eyes. Thank you, he said. It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received. It's not a gift, Mary corrected. It's a responsibility. You'll have to take care of them every day. Water them, prune them, give them affection. If they die, it's because you didn't know how to care for them. Henry understood the symbolism. And if I manage to make them flourish? Then maybe, Mary said with a small smile, maybe you'll have learned to be a father. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Henry? She said, using his first name in public for the first time. Yes? Thank you for telling me about her, for letting me know my mother through your memories. Thank you for giving me this chance, he replied. Mary nodded and left, leaving Henry alone with the flowers and a feeling that finally something was blossoming between them. The flowers prospered in Henry's office. He cared for them religiously, observing each new bud, each leaf that opened. And little by little, while caring for the plants, he also learned to care for the fragile relationship he was building with Mary. It was not the happy ending of fairy tales. It was something more real, more difficult, but also more lasting. It was the slow blossoming of forgiveness, cultivated with patience and watered with tears of regret and hope. And one spring afternoon, when the office flowers were especially beautiful, Mary appeared again. She looked at the plants, saw how well cared for they were, and smiled. "I think you're learning," she said. "I'm trying," Henry replied. "Keep trying," Mary said. And for the first time, she kissed his cheek before leaving. It was just a kiss on the cheek, a simple gesture. But for Henry, it was as if all the flowers in the world had bloomed at the same time. The road was still long, but finally there was hope that one day he could be called not only father, but family. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.